Hello everyone, this is Professor Reimer. This video is for my world history class on Friday, March 5th and Monday, March 8th. It's entitled Unit 7, DOL 4, Latin American Revolutions. It is the last of the political revolutions that we are going to study in this unit. We've already looked at the American Revolution and the French Revolution. So, as always, let's begin with our objectives. Now, I'm having trouble advancing my slide, so be patient with me. There we go. So let's begin with a quote. It takes a revolution to make a solution. Bob Marley. In this lesson, we are going to trace the influence of the American and the French revolutions on Latin America by summarizing our notes. There is a note-taking guide that I put in Google Classroom to follow this presentation. And the way we're going to summarize our notes is very simply, we're going to answer the essential question. So there it is. Write it in your notes right now. What were the major factors contributing to independence movements in Latin America? And we're going to summarize our notes by practicing our thesis writing abilities. More on that at the end of the presentation. So let's begin with a preview. And it's a short video. Now, if you're with me in class, we'll watch it in class. If not, then I put the video in the Google Classroom. So go find it now and pause the video, come back here. All right, here we go. Here are the main topics today: causes, the leaders of these revolutions, and their effects. First, let's begin with the causes. Four main causes. So we're going to talk first about problems in the Spanish Empire, the influences of those Enlightenment ideals, and also the influences of the American and French revolutions. Remember, we're tracing those influences, so we need to talk about them. First, though, problems in the Spanish Empire. Two problems here. First, political disempowerment. What I mean by that is that the Latin American colonies were not run by the people in Latin America. In Spain, the Spanish colonies are run by the Council of Indies. This is a group that the king appoints. They meet in Spain. They don't meet in Latin America. And then their instructions are sent overseas to the viceroy, the king's official, who's appointed by the king to govern the colony. So political power rests with the king and his appointees who reside primarily in Spain. So that's the first kind of disempowerment. The second kind of disempowerment is economic disempowerment, right? So these colonies existed for Spain. They existed to enrich Spain. Remember, this is during this period of time when mercantilism was the popular economic policy. That policy stated that a country's power depended on the amount of gold and silver in the treasury. Where did you get this gold and silver? Primarily from your colonies or from the goods that you produced in your colonies and then sold to the homeland. So the people in Latin America are primarily not making goods and resources for themselves. They're making goods and resources for Spain. All right, another key problem in the Spanish or in Latin America is social inequality. Remember, there is a rigid social hierarchy that is dominated by those native Spaniards or the peninsulares. They're at the top. Underneath them are Creoles. Now, to people below these two groups, they looked kind of the same, right? They're rich white people. But the Creoles resented that the peninsulares were above them in wealth and power and prestige, and yet did not live for the most part in the New World. Below the Creoles are the mixed races. So you have mestizos, you have mulattoes. Now, we find these terms offensive these days, but that is the terms they used back then. And at the very bottom, of course, are the Native Americans, as well as the enslaved Africans. So a rigid social hierarchy existed in the colonies. Now, let's move on to the Enlightenment and the influence from the Enlightenment. Remember, before these ideas began to spread, the idea governing most political dealings was this idea of the divine right of king, that kings are placed on the throne by God and only God could remove them. After the Enlightenment, thanks to the writings of John Locke, Voltaire, and others, right, government is now seen as based on a contract between the ruler and the ruled. That governments don't exist; they're not from God. They're from the people, and their job is to protect the citizens' natural rights of life, liberty, and property. And if they aren't doing that, the citizens have a right to revolt against that tyranny. Those are the same ideas that are first proposed or first put into practice by North Americans, right, in their own revolution. The Latin Americans are going to see that influence of a colony overthrowing the more powerful mother country and do the same, seek to do the same. All right. Now, these Latin American revolutions, they begin in the latter stages of the French Revolution, primarily once Napoleon crowns himself emperor in 1804. So remember from our previous lesson, he put his family and friends in charge of the territories he conquered. So I think it was his brother, right? Joseph on the throne of Spain, and the Spanish royal family flees. So in this chaotic environment, right, the Latin Americans see an opportunity to assert their own independence, and they largely succeed, as we will see soon. But first, let's check, right, your understanding. Pause the video and see if you can answer this question. All right. Did you get it? We were just talking about it. The Napoleonic Wars weakened Spain's power overseas, right? All attention, not all, but most attention and resources are focused against Napoleon and less in the colonies. All right. Now to the leaders. Latin American revolution is going to be led by some very strong, very capable leaders who are going to see these revolutions through. So let's begin with Simón Bolívar. He is an elite Creole planter who becomes a military general, right? He's called the George Washington of South America, and he raises an army, leads these armies in liberating territories. In fact, nickname is El Liberator. Yes, did I get that right? Yeah. And he does it by partnering with the lower classes, right? So he's a Creole, right? He's partnering with these lower classes. They're the bulk of his army to overthrow the Peninsulares who are representing Spain's authority. Now, in the aftermath, right? So once territories are liberated, he wanted a federated Latin America, much the way that North America is federated. We have our independent states, but are a part of the federal government under the Constitution. That plan for Latin America is crushed by infighting. Basically, people couldn't agree about how that plan would work. And so very quickly, these territories become independent nation states. All right. At the same time that he's fighting for the liberation of Venezuela and places like that, right, another Creole who had trained in European armies, Jose de San Martin, is fighting, liberating Argentina from Spanish control, and they worked together at times, but they are also in different parts of Latin America, right? He meets with Bolivar, and they had different ideas about, again, what post-independence would be. Bolivar favored democracy. San Martin felt only monarchy could work, right? Constitutional monarchy. That's not what the people wanted. It's not what the people demanded. And he ends up moving to Europe and dies in obscurity. Now, we've been talking about primarily South America, but the first calls for independence actually happened in Mexico. First by a priest from the town of Dolores, Miguel Hidalgo. Again, a Creole, right? If you're seeing a trend here, yes, it's these movements are largely led by the Creoles who are wanting greater political power from the Peninsulares. I don't know if you can hear this music, probably not, but it's the bell ringing, right? So on September 16th, he rings this church bell, calls upon his lower class, right, mestizo, indigenous prisoners, take up arms against the Spanish. Notice the year 1810. Leads them toward Mexico City, mass slaughter Peninsulares in their path, but he never made it there. He's captured and shot. in 1811. But the calls for revolution don't die with him. Another priest by the name of Jose Morelos takes over, and Napoleon considered him a great general, right? He says, with 3 such men as Jose Morelos, I could conquer the world. So he's able to establish a Congress that creates Declaration of Rights, abolishes slavery, declares equality of classes. If that sounds a lot like what happened in the French Revolution, that's because we're tracing the influence of the American and French revolutions in the Latin American revolutions. All right. Sadly, he is captured and executed in December 1815, but Mexico does in fact win its independence. All right. So, were you paying attention? Let's check. Pause the video, go back and review your notes, come back, answer the question. All right, did you put B, defeated Napoleon? No, it's not B. He led independent movements in Latin America. He's known as the Liberator. Boy, I need to practice my Spanish. All right, now let's finish with the effects. And if look, you see the themes here: political, economic, right? These themes are how you are able to write thesis statements, which is what the goal is today. You're summarizing your notes by answering the essential question in the form of a thesis statement. That's where we're going. Let's finish up and get there. So first, some political effects. What happened is that in these new independent countries, strongmen, dictators come to power. They're known as caudillos. So why? 2 main reasons. Number 1, the upper classes wanted it, supported it, because it kept the lower classes out of power. And 2, the lower classes didn't have much experience with democracy. They're not like the North American colonists who had experiences with representative governments during their colonial period. The lower classes in Latin America did not. To them, dictatorship seemed normal. And so these caudillos tended to be corrupt and tended to use the levers of the state to enrich themselves and their supporters and family. All right, international effect, right? And what's known as the Monroe Doctrine. You studied this in 8th grade. James Monroe is American president in 1823. He says this: the American continents are henceforth not to be considered as subjects for future colonization by any European powers. In other words, Europeans, stay away. Now, why does he say this? Well, the U.S. had just fought a war against the British and had shown U.S. leaders that revolutionary victories could sometimes lead to sequels. The United States didn't want to see further bloodshed, further revolutions so close to home. Also, the U.S. had key political and economic interests. Right? So the U.S., along with Great Britain, began massive investments in Latin America, in their infrastructure. They became major trading partners. So why would the British agree to support this? Well, because they are also having a favorable trading position. So you have the U.S. declaration with the British muscle, their navy, that yokes Latin America to Great Britain and the United States. All right. Lastly, economic effects. What happens is that not much actually changes as far as the economic structure of the society. The only thing that really changes is the trading partner, right? So it was Spain, right? Spain had a monopoly on the goods and resources coming out of Spanish colonies. Now the U.S. and Great Britain become the country's major trading partners. But the colonial economy, like I said, continues, right? Latin America mainly exports cash crops and raw materials while importing manufactured goods. In other words, they are not economically independent. They are dependent on these foreign investors and foreign buyers, which leads to an imbalance of trade, right? So imbalance of trade means like greater imports than exports, right? And so in order to overcome this, Latin American countries take out these large loans in order to build infrastructure, which needed after this massively bloody long wars, right? Roads, bridges, dams, all needed to be constructed. And when they couldn't pay back their loans, which happened, they lost control of major industries, banana plantations, gold mines, things like that. All right. Lastly, or did I say lastly? No, I really mean lastly. Did the social pyramid change? No, sadly not. Once the Spaniards were expelled, the new government seized their lands, put them up for sale, but only the Creoles could afford to buy. Remember, it was the Creoles who were leading these revolutions. It was the Creoles who become the ones in power, and they enriched themselves with this land. So they simply replaced the Peninsulares at the top, but the other classes remained the same at the bottom. All right, let's summarize. Politically, before, dictatorship of the Council of Indies and the viceroys, Spanish control. After, local control, but still dictatorship. Economically, unequal trade with Spain, unequal trade not with Spain, but with Great Britain and the US. Socially, natives at the top, Creoles and the rest at the bottom. Now, Creoles at the top with the rest population at the bottom. So this revolution is very similar to the North American revolutions, that it was a conservative revolution. It's led by the elites, or in this case, near elites of society, wanting greater political and economic power for themselves, but not really wanting to completely overthrow the existing social order. So not like the French Revolution, which was attempting to completely replace the existing social, political, economic order. Latin America simply wanted to gain its political independence, but not change much else. All right, we'll leave it to Bolivar and his last words. Right, remember, he's taking up the cause of independence, wants to create a new order, Latin American countries be free, democratic, federated. Instead, on his death, he saw a world in which dictators ruled and disunity reigned. Disgusted by what he saw, he gave this warning to future generations. America is ungovernable for us. He who serves a revolution plows the sea. Fortunately, in the last half century or so, Latin America countries have made incredible progress in strengthening their positions economically, politically in the world. And I would maybe Bolivar would rethink this warning based on what's been happening of late. All right. Remember, I said we're processing by summarizing your notes in answering the essential question. What was the essential question? There it is. What were the major factors contributing to the independence movements in Latin America? How are you going to answer this? Use the question in your response. The major factors contributing to the independence movements in Latin America were, how many do you put? 1, 2, 3. If you give more than 3, then it's just going to be like a paragraph instead of just a sentence or 2. Remember the formula, right? X, however, A and B, therefore Y, or the variations on that formula, Y, or A and B, therefore Y, or Y because A and B. Right here we're using the formula variation Y because A and B, or in this case, the major factors contributing to the independence movements in Latin America were. Now don't get too specific. Like, I don't want to see like Simon Bolivar in here. That's too narrow. But don't get too broad and say something like the major factors were political. So you got to get somewhere just right in the middle. You might say the strong leadership and just leave it at that, right? That would be an example of something just right. All right, work hard on it. Let me know if you have questions. I'll see you next time.